And let me just underscore that the title of this is Climate Change for this session. I do think we need to be talking about it as a climate emergency. I just remind you what I quoted Johan Rockström saying, and I saw him in Glasgow saying this a couple of times, but he said, we are now at the planetary boundaries. Tipping points we assumed we would be passing at some point in the future, we are now passing. So everything is speeding up. And as we've certainly reported in our project, there are a lot of scientists who are pretty scared about where the science is because the science can't keep up with the reality of what happened in Lytton in British Columbia, what happened with the heat dome in California and Nevada, what happened in central Germany, which interestingly, when I was up in Glasgow, the vice president for E.ON said that one disaster alone in the Eiffel Mountains cost them 30 billion euros. And they hadn't really thought about what might happen if this happened to the Rhine and the Eiffel Mountain area or any other area. So we are on a knife edge, and that's the framing. There's the urgency, and you know, those of you living in Britain, and we saw from Leif in Stockholm, and you left behind a lot of snow, I think, in Stockholm. We've seen unusually early snow and very cold temperatures here in the United Kingdom. The first time anyone can remember it since maybe 1953. So this is about change. And another thing that's happened this year is the wind has stopped blowing. Why is that important? Because all the calculations made on sustainability and sustainable power have been made on the basis that a certain amount of wind is going to blow the turbines. But in many parts of northern Europe, the wind simply hasn't been blowing. So actually here in the UK, one of the coal-fired power stations which had been mothballed had to be activated simply to provide electricity at critical times during the summer. And that's partly due to the failure of the Gulf Stream, the failure of the jet stream. In other words, much that we've taken for granted simply cannot be assumed anymore. And I'm doing that in the hope that we do now have our two guests. Welcome, both of you. I'm now going to introduce everybody. So we have Anna König Jerlmyr, who's Mayor of Stockholm. Welcome. We have Sean McGuire, Director of the Brussels Confederation of British Industry. Welcome, Sean. We have Peter Jelkeby, who's Country Retail Manager and Chief Sustainability Officer for IKEA. And we also have Jan-Olof Jacke, who is Director General of Swedish Enterprise. Welcome to everybody. So what I've tried to do is give you a framing. I happened to be in Glasgow for 2 weeks. It was a grueling 2 weeks, 40,000 people. But my personal view very strongly is it was not blah, blah, blah. It was much more. And we have to see it in those terms. But what we need to do is understand the impact on business. And I'd like to encourage all of you, and I'm looking at the screen here of those of you who are coming in from elsewhere, I'd like to hear what the impact on business is, whether business is really running with the absolute imperative now on green. And I'd like to hear from any of you here. I'd like to encourage you more to interact, please, because all of you must have some experience of how greening of your company or your institution is going or not, whether you're being pushed even faster than you planned or whether you're having to drag people with you. So that's the framing. But could I go to Sean McGuire first, Director for the Confederation of British Industry, Sean, because I need to understand what you think happened in Glasgow and how we take this forward and how, dare I say, how brave people are being. And that's choosing words which we use right at the beginning, to be brave and to be bold, to be agile and to be nimble and understand the enormity of the challenge and the timeline ahead.
Thank you, and good afternoon, and welcomes from Brussels as well, where we indeed had some snow this morning, but not the levels that perhaps we have seen in Sweden today. I think I'll start by saying that we as the CBI, who represent all sectors and all sizes, is very much committed to the climate change agenda. And it's not just done out of PR, it's actually done out of real business and a moral responsibility to address this, because the cost of inaction is greater than the cost of action. And I think that's the starting point. There's been an acceptance that climate must be integral to all businesses and all sectors. From COP26, I mean, we view it very much as a success. I think headlines can focus on phase down and phase out of coal, but actually having coal and in the kind of final declaration, it should be seen very much as a success. And I think one of the other things that we as the CBI, who were also present for the 2 weeks in COP, and had a very active agenda with hustings, with a dinner led by John Kerry with over 800 delegates, with the New Zealand Prime Minister as well, is that business is very much at the leading and the front of this and are committed to it. And if I do say so, and it may be slightly controversial, I think one of the winners of COP26 was business, and for them showcasing what they are doing in order to achieve a net zero. And just to give you an example, 2/3 of the UK's largest companies have signed up to the Race to Zero campaign. So firms are and indeed need to take the lead on this. So from our perspective, COP was a success. Business were one of the winners. They now need to turn that positive language, the commitments, into real action to deliver for the next generation and to meet those targets for 2050.
Sean, can I just press you? I mean, you're talking about business. Are you talking about the major corporates? Because one of the areas which still hasn't been focused on is SMEs.
Yes, I mean, I think major corporates are there, but actually, I think one of the things that is very clear from even those major corporates, they're looking both at there's consumer demand for this and there's also supplier demand, and actually, we do want to bring it all together. So the small businesses will find it more challenging, but actually, there are opportunities indeed for small businesses as we move to the transition to, the construction and building sector, how they can, be at the front of having more energy efficient homes. So I do think there is a real commitment from the majority of businesses, small and large, to really take this forward. It's easier to get the large corporates to make the big pledges, but consumer demand at the moment is driving quite a lot of change for businesses, both large and small.
Jan-Olof, I can see you nodding. Let me tell you, I've already got one question here. Aren't many businesses just guilty of greenwashing, i.e. claiming meaningless environmental policies? And this is crucial. Every target seems to be for 2050. We can't wait that long. There are actually a lot of targets for 2025, 28, 30 and so on, but the point of that is clear. So bear that in mind as I'm asking you the questions. Let me come to Peter from IKEA. What's your view? I mean, your foundation was very active in Glasgow. Very proactive as well. What kind of conclusion have you taken away? Because you were a major supporter. It could have all blown up in your face.
It could have, but I think this is very much about engagement. And I think we have been engaged as a company since we took a decision, you could say 3 years ago, that out of the denial box, if we want to move as a company, we have 3 roads that we want to tackle. One is about affordability, accessible, and sustainability, meaning basically moving the sustainability into the total arena, integrated into the total business. When it comes to COP, and that's kind of creating an engagement, which I think is a key factor. Engagements among the leadership, and engagements among the people and the co-workers and the communities you're acting within, right? We saw COP26 as another milestone to activate the right discussions, to take further the collaboration we actually have already before COP26, and to be a next step changer for us on the agenda. And from that point of view, I think COP26 is a success. I think it was the right dialogue. You can always debate about was it brave enough targets and so forth, but we are moving the dialogue. The key will be, if it's a success, is to walk the talk afterwards, because the greenwashing will of course be there if we're not taking actions. And I think on the point of the goal setting and the 2050, 2030, we as a company, I think everyone as a company we have targets here and now, as well as 2050, 2030, 2025, right? But back to COP26, yes, we think you moved the agenda forward. We think there was a lot of good collaborative discussions. The kind of final verdict of this milestone is that how we take it forward afterwards.
Do we have agreement here, actually, that it wasn't just about COP26 ending 4 weeks ago this Saturday. This was a process which was given extra kick, extra momentum, extra drive. Is that agreed by all 4 of you? Good.
Definitely.
I think I see smiles, which means yes. All right, that's the easiest question I've asked. Right, Mayor, I'll come to you in a moment if I may, because what I just want to do is just ask Jan-Olof. Jan-Olof, you were nodding agreement with the CBI. Do you have any anxieties about where things are going, or do you think there really is irreversible momentum now?
I strongly believe there is a momentum that can and should not be stopped. And I think, as Sean referred to, the consumer demand is a critical component of that. And that, I think, is also almost like a guarantee for not getting away with greenwashing. And if I just go back a few years in time, I think a lot of companies still saw this as like a big threat. I think it has moved now to, I don't hear any of our member companies talking about it as anything else than a huge challenge, but also a huge business opportunity. So what I think is the critical thing is where Peter was, ambitions are set, ambitions are high. What we struggle with is to see the real result. And I'm sure climate will be more bothered about the results than the ambitions. I think the business is now very, very ready. The technological innovations are in some of the sectors which have the highest CO2 emissions. Technological breakthroughs are coming very close. But we also need regulatory frameworks and legal frameworks that supports those investments.
Right. Okay. Can I just ask one question before I go to Anna? Is there agreement really that among you that boards and mindsets cannot escape now? There's an irreversible direction, and I'm using that word again, irreversible direction. In other words, those that drag their feet will pay a price, building on what Sean said earlier. Very quickly, Sean, yes or no?
Yes, and it's not just consumers. I actually think investors and the finance community is making this a boardroom issue, that sustainability has to be part of the core business direction and progress. So it's not just consumers. They're getting pressures from investors and the finance community as well. So greenwashing is no longer an option. It is committed both from bottom up and top down, and shareholders are actually being much more vocal on this as well. And indeed, some of the figures that we have done through a Goal 13 impact initiative platform we had with 500 interviews from across many companies. 89% of businesses have at least one climate-related target, and 86% believe that investment choices will be impacted by the climate policy. So it is very much front and center of boardrooms.
Are we all in agreement there? Good.
Yes, we are.
Good, we are. Right, Peter. Now, Anna, can I come to you? Because I wanted to come to you a little later because of what we heard. I don't know if you were here when we heard from Dan from Vinnova, I think it is. Retrofitting all streets in Sweden, he was talking about. Citizens, 75% in favour of changes.
Yes.
Build something in at local level. In other words, there's clear data.
Yes.
What is your experience in Stockholm?
I actually attended a Harvard course during this autumn about city planning, and Dan was one of the speakers, and he was giving lessons about transforming the cities. You can see it in Barcelona through superblocks. You can see it in Stockholm, making greener space, especially after the pandemic. You can really feel that the citizens appreciate more green areas, more parks, but also the reduced traffic, and that is one of the most, when it comes to a political perspective, one of the most difficult things to do. But when you reduce this traffic in the city, giving people more space, then they love it afterwards. But in the beginning, they're very critical. So one reform we did was to do this children's street. So streets in the city, in some streets, the children could be there to skate or to play. It was green areas. And actually 75% of the people living there was positive. It was the other people coming with a car was very provoked by it and said, oh, look at them, they're shutting down the city. But actually people living in this area felt, actually we can live in the city center and still have kids. And we love it because we can't take them to school. It's too difficult with the traffic and so on. So, of course, if you look for the city's perspective, we have two main reasons for the CO2 emissions. It's traffic and then it's buildings. So we have to work both to more efficiency, to see mobility as a service, to see the car as a mobility service, to have access rather than own it. But we also have to work with the building and construction sector to reduce the emissions.
Let me press you, though, on the mindset. You know, in the end, I, as a non-Swede and a non-Nordic, would assume that Sweden tends to be pretty energy efficient. We're living in a country where we've got 26 million gas boilers, all of which have got to be retrofitted or changed to air source heat pumps or something. We don't have the fitters, we don't have the capacity to do it, and we don't have the financial support. What is your recommendation about how this can be done? In other words, how you change the mindset of people who naturally consume energy and don't quite realize yet how serious and urgent the imperative for our planet is?
I mean, I was also in Glasgow for the C40 network. I'm sitting there, and I had the pleasure to be in the board with the Mayor of London, who's the new chair.
And the Deputy Mayor talked about that this morning.
Oh, okay. But one thing we're talking about to engage the citizens through data. That was also mentioned. But if you bring public data, then people will be more aware. It's both cost for them, but also, of course, environmental footprint. And if you give them access to how can I, in my daily life, actually, we can see this when we worked with the citizens in Stockholm, when they get more aware of how much they use and what time they use the energy and what cost it has for the climate and for themselves. They get more proactive, and we can see positive results. So that's really something that we work with. You can see it here in London, through Breathe London, when they put sensors on the children's backpacks and showcased the air quality to their parents. Then it was a huge pressure on the politicians. You have to do something about the air quality. It's too bad. Otherwise, they wouldn't have noticed, and no one would have asked for reforms. So that's like the strategy we have, and also very inspired what they do in London. I think that's great to have this partnership with other cities.
You're a politician.
Yeah.
Green can lose votes. Many politicians are deeply concerned that actually what has to be done is so dramatic that it'll end up as a pushback in the next election. In fact, I heard a senior public servant from a European country say, what we need now is politicians who are prepared to commit political suicide in order to get done what is needed at the speed that's needed. What's your reflection of that? Can you be re-elected with a green policy?
We talked earlier about values and I think it's about that. It's about moral. We have no other choice. We have a few years to change. So it's our children will look us in the eyes and like, you knew all this. What
How do you sell that? How do you sell that in the campaign?
I think you have to bring the sense of urgency. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you talk to many mayors today, they adapt to climate change. It could be heat waves that kills elderly people. It could be flooding. It could be a lot of different kind of consequences when it comes. So I think people are already aware. But I hope, you can't, this is the most important issue ahead for any politicians. But it is difficult because when it comes to the measures or to the regulations regarding traffic, for example, that could be very provocative. But you have a moral responsibility to work with these issues.
My last question to you at the moment, how do you believe business is handling this? Obviously in Sweden, there's a pretty positive attitude by and large, but certainly in many other parts of the world, as Sean has already said, it's seen as a cost, even if the cost of inaction is higher than the cost of getting something done. What's your belief about the relationship and the imperative and the willingness of business to engage?
I think that today business is more pro-climate and working to mitigate emissions than politics, because they are really out there. A couple of years ago, the politician was quite afraid of, if we do this, if we regulate, it will be too much cost for the companies. Today, the companies and business ask us, you have to deregulate. This kind of structures are obstacles in our way of the green transition. We have many examples. We can talk about IKEA, and if you want to change your logistic, the cars, to electric, it's too heavy, then you need another driving license. That's one obstacle. In the city of Stockholm, we want to electrify all transport, for example. But I would say that working with business, that could give people hope and see positive working with climate issues. For example, it gives you new jobs, new possibilities for business. So we have to bring hope as well and the positive effects. If you look for the US, the fastest growing jobs is to work with solar energy and wind power. And that's the most growing sectors. So I think you could use that kind of, this could actually be positive for your city or for your neighborhood.
All right, well, look, let me find out from all the three gentlemen here representing different organizations about what is still needed to persuade the foot draggers, the laggards, those who are skeptical, those who are not persuaded by the urgency of what is needed. What's your view, Peter?
I think it needs to be strong demands, clear demands, what's needed. I mean, what are we to deliver? And that's needed. You can't have wishy-washy frames or regulations.
Give me more, help me
I think it's
that.
roadmaps about what's happening now in UK here, where I'm more active. It's about setting targets where we need to adhere to. It is about creating infrastructures on the point you made about electric vehicles. We know that if we don't have electric vehicles in our last mile deliveries, eventually we are not going to do the job we need to do, right? So it's about setting that foundation. I think that's the important part, right? Then I have to say on your point about we can't leave the politicians alone either in this discussion. I think it's about us, the way we see it. There are everything from small everyday behaviors that actually has a big impact on the environment to the bigger investments. And it happens so then, not because I'm from IKEA, but I am, that life at home is one thing where we can influence a lot, right? But back to your point, it is about setting expectation clear, the targets that should be there, setting an infrastructure to deliver, have cross collaboration, not only with us. We know that if I take something positive out of COVID, if there's anything, it was the collaboration with the government actually and other companies across sector. We need to stimulate much more of those things if we should move where we need to move.
How can that be done? I mean, in other words, what's your audit of how effective the policies are in a country like the United Kingdom?
I think they're getting clearer. I think the steps
Clearer.
They are getting obviously clearer. I'm not the one to comment. There is always more to do. I think there were big steps taken as we speak right now, if you compare to what was before, for example, COP26. I think that we can stimulate more the collaboration that's actually starting. I think we as a bigger company, we know we have a responsibility beyond IKEA. That means we are active in collaboration with both bigger and smaller companies and with politicians. So I think it's a broader spectrum of how you can influence. Right?
Okay. Sean, what was your view? You've just had the CBI annual conference split around several centres. We're not going to go into the Prime Minister's address. But what I want to do, I'm talking about Peppa Pig, but what I want to do is ask you what kind of conclusion was drawn by Tony Danker, your Director General, by your President Karen Bill-Moria, about how profoundly or not UK business is addressing and embracing much of what we're talking about?
Well, as I said, Karen, Lord Bill-Moria, and indeed Tony Danker spent most of the 2 weeks in Glasgow. And I have to say, when we had our debrief on the Monday morning after the agreement on this Saturday, you could only see enthusiasm in both their feedback. They were really, really proud of the role that business had played there, the real commitment. And I think that really was the starting point. But it isn't just business that, and this is where you're pushing me towards how we do that partnership with government. And I think that is where we have welcomed the UK's net zero strategy. It is on the whole positive, but there are bits missing, particularly around consumer incentives on home energy efficiency, about defining the business models that we will use for hydrogen production. And indeed, from a UK perspective, when you look at the budget on decarbonisation, we feel that the overall scale of public investment doesn't match international competitors. We estimate that the UK's public investment is around 1.2% of GDP compared to 3.8% in the US and 1.8% in the EU. So I think we need to do much more there. There's also other elements on around, as you mentioned at the start, the wind had stopped blowing. But in the UK, one of the biggest challenges going forward is how to connect 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. In the past decade, we built 10 gigawatts. We have 9 years to build 30. And I think these are the challenges that business have in front of us. So we need faster regulation, setting the regulatory environment, the real putting money, public investment front and center to commit this, because less than 9 years. I mean, it's tomorrow for business investment, and we don't have much time. So there was a real enthusiasm from the business community. We need the momentum to go forward, both political and with business. And my final point on this is that it can't just be done by the UK, the EU, and a few other ones. It has to be a global response. And that's where we really want, working towards COP26 in Egypt and under the presidency of Jan-Olof to keep the momentum going, that we really, really, really get more concrete results by Cairo next year.
Yeah, we should underscore that the UK keeps the presidency until Sharm el-Sheikh, COP27 next November, and therefore the momentum will continue with Britain still holding the baton and running with that kind of pressure. Jan-Olof, can I just come in on with you? Again, what has to be done to persuade the waverers and the laggards and those who are more sceptical or less convinced still?
I think I don't think that is our biggest issue at the moment, to be honest. And you asked about, can you win an election with a sort of a very forward-leaning climate agenda? I don't think you can win an election without a forward-leaning climate agenda, at least not in our country. But there are quite a number of things that I think are really important to accelerate the momentum. I think one big thing is that national goals serves a purpose, but they must not get in the way of global positive climate impact. I think trade is an absolute prerequisite for the green transition to move fast, and it's how technological innovation can have a great global impact much faster than if every single economy should make their own inventions. I also think on a local level, and I think it's relevant for many other countries as well, we stand in front of significant technological breakthroughs in terms of steel without coal, cement without CO2 emissions, fast electrification. But then we need to work much better together between business and governments, local and national, on how can we significantly shorten the time for getting permissions. It takes far too long. If we have 10 years of lead time today and 9 years until 2030, it doesn't really match very well. And also a significant extension of the access to green electricity. We've been very, very fortunate in Sweden to have fossil-free electricity for quite some time, but the capacity needs to be very different if we're going to match the investments we have in front of us.
Okay.
And I think, if we do that fast, it also serves as fantastic examples that the transformation is a good thing. It creates jobs. It delivers positive climate impact, and I think that alone should take more people on board.
And just before I come to you, 2 or 3 questions here. There's one about China and Russia being on board. Are they on board with climate objectives? Can we achieve the global targets without them? But here's a personal comment. I'm 43, no name here. Was in the 20s when I was amazed by the Kyoto Protocol. Great plan, but nothing changed. Is it too late? That underscores a certain perception out there. Question, are policymakers and business brave enough in their actions, or are they just responding to consumer and voter demands, doing the bare minimum? And David Lewis, should we measure a country's carbon footprint by its consumption and not by production? I'll ask you to pick up on any of those in a moment, but Anna.
Now, after Glasgow, every country had to present their plans, and you can see that a few countries only, so they need to step up, are in line with the Paris Agreement. But if you look at the cities, actually the majority are in line with the Paris Agreement. Over 60 of approximately 90 cities are in line with the Paris Agreement. So I think also that a lot of hope are in the cities. And we, for example, in Stockholm, we collaborate now with the business sector, with Volvo, with Scania, with grid owners, with electric companies, to have a emission-free city from traffic by 2030. I know Amsterdam has kind of the same goals, and a lot of cities are now stepping up. So what we will do is that we can see that consumers are now changing and buying hybrids or electric cars, and the Volvo and Scania are heavy traffic and logistic that are electric, but they need charging infrastructure. So we said that we will finance in the city 100% charging infrastructure until 2030. And then we work very closely with the business, and we have also special targets. So it's not only that we say 2030 and we will not be around if we don't succeed. We have how many percent will there be at 2023, at 2026? So I think that you need to break down the long-term goal and also measure it, and really, ask for, how is the impact? What kind of data proves that you actually are succeeding?
But it's not just about EVs, and this is where I want to come into Peter and the others. It's also about how you live.
Yeah.
It's about the energy coming out of the chimney.
Yeah.
It's about how you consume, how you boil your water, how you heat your home, and that obviously has major implications for IKEA. But that's it's right across your lifestyle. It's down to the 7-Eleven and the way they have their fridges, and how they consume, how much energy they consume. It's about everything. Is that also part of your plan in Stockholm?
Yeah, we have district heating, and that is one of the reasons why we have reduced our emissions with 60% since 1990. So I think but not every city has district heating, but almost all of our households are warmed up with district heating. So.
But I'm thinking about other consumptions
Yeah,
as well. People consuming their electricity, their washing machines and everything
Yes.
else. Thinking about, do I need to do this? Can I do this more efficiently?
Yeah, I think we will have a flexible system where you actually pay more if you use it during peak hours, for example, and also that's what the grid owners, we have to be much more aware when we use the electricity. And if you want to charge your car very fast when everyone else want to do it costs more, for example. And then you can nudge people also to reduce the cost if you are more efficient or if you use the capacity not during peak. So I think we can do a lot with the market-based solutions based on efficiency.
Peter, you're moving ahead significantly on sustainability with everything that you do.
Yes.
How it's consumed and also recycling it.
Yes.
How much progress are you making, and how much has this changed the attitude of customers?
Now, I think on the comment made there is this kind of, is it really genuinely a better business? Yes, it is generally a better business that is emerging or developing as we speak, basically, right? We have today, you could say roughly 30% of our products that we're selling today is connected to a more sustainable life at home, right? And I think but it is this kind of 360 approach for us. And now if I speak about IKEA in this case, but we could represent quite a few number of companies in a way of, it's not only about the way what you actually are selling. It's how, of course, what's inside the products, how is it being produced, how you bring it to the consumers, when it comes into the units, what actually are you selling. That supports a more sustainable lifestyle, but we happen to do a lot. And then is how you bring it home. It is this kind of, you can't just, I think what has moved within us at least was that we had it in our DNA, we believed about sustainable business. But the difference is the last 3 years, it's much more a 360 approach, it's much more integrated. It is where you position this also in your business. I am, for example, and I said this before, so maybe you heard me before, my title is CSO, Chief Sustainable Officer. You can take that as a little bit of a gimmick or not. Huh? I decided not to take it as a gimmick. I take it super seriously because I need it start with myself walking the talk and leading that way. And that engagement piece that we have put in sustainability within our innovation department in IKEA, that's where we develop most of our business because we know if we don't do it, we're not going to meet the targets we need and we're not going to do better business.
As you put it on the agenda, there are those who say chief risk officers were never really about risk. It was about saying we're doing risk.
But I'm Chief Sustainable Officer. That's the thing. I'm not.
I haven't finished my sentence yet. The fear is that many companies are having a chief sustainability officer because it looks good in the annual report, and actually we can say we've got a chief sustainability officer.
I think that is exactly what we moved away from. We had a chief sustainability officer, which was not myself. The whole management team in IKEA that has something connected to sustainability. Why? We are sending a signal that is broader than just one function. So we're actually moving away from what you are hinting at to have a broader commitment, and that is what it needs to be. It is a better business for us, but for the many. and we need to move that business forward for obvious reasons stated before.
I've got to tell you, I'm not hinting at it. Several people have told me directly. They said, I'm Chief Risk Officer, but I'm not really doing any risk.
Yeah.
Or I'm Chief Risk Sustainability Officer, but...
Yeah, but I can't shy away from that, because if you look on the way we are out, honestly, I don't want to pretend like I'm perfect here, right? But I think what we have genuinely taken this seriously, both what we are setting up our goals and that we are walking the talk and taking action.
All right, I'm getting quite a few anonymous questions here, but does anyone want to share their experience of sustainability within the company? In other words, what success or challenges have you had? Please, and introduce yourself.
Yes, okay. Hi, my name is Fredrik Bernsel. I'm the managing director of a small marketing agency. We specialize in LinkedIn marketing. And the question came up with SMB companies and, what can smaller businesses do for sustainability as well? And of course, when you run a small company like I do, we can't afford to hire a CSO or, things like that. But one positive experience I had is one of our customers is a large company, Moody's Analytics, a financial analytics platform. And they actually reached out to all of their suppliers. We were one of them. And they demanded from us to come up with sort of a sustainability plan and asked us about our carbon footprint and things that you, as a small business owner, maybe not necessarily, I think it's super important personally, but when you have a small office with a few computers, you don't really think about your carbon footprint. And I think this was an example. Moody's said to us, if you want to be our supplier, you have to do this. Took a couple of hours, like a long questionnaire, and really declaring, and made us think about this. And my positive experience from that was that more large companies could potentially ask of their smaller suppliers to step up and put some pressure on them. So yeah, that was an experience from an SMB perspective.
Move the microphone back, but of course, one of the challenges there is getting the data. You were asked the question, but you may not have the data, and that's what's coming through loud and clear.
Yeah, in our case, what we did was we needed to look up some information that we didn't have before, such as what is the average carbon footprint of one office worker with one desk and an office size of this many square meters, and of course there were many aspects of their questionnaire and their process that wasn't applicable to us. We didn't use raw materials and stuff like that, but I still think it was nice to see a large company putting pressure on their smaller suppliers.
That's a big change. Can you just move the microphone back behind you?
Christer Omstad. We are a company that deals with end-of-life tire waste. And one of the things that comes up continuously in every single climate debate is electric vehicles, charging stations, and so forth. Do any of you consider that actually by introducing a lot more EVs into the market, you are actually producing a lot more end-of-life tires? Basically in the UK it's 55 million end-of-life tires a year. On a global basis, 29 million metric tons. EVs, they produce a lot more waste from the tires. So it's good to have a solution to the problem when it comes to transportation. At the same time, you're introducing more waste.
Thank you. Okay, can we just park that one for the moment, because I'd like to go to Jan-Olof and also Sean. This issue of data and actually businesses having to now realize how they are consuming hydrocarbons and everything that we're talking about. How much is that now really an imperative which has really gone up the agenda literally in the last few months? Sean.
Thank you. Sustainable reporting, sustainable finance, the role of measuring emissions really has just catapulted in this past 12 months. You're right to say, and from our side, we firmly believe that every business must and every company should establish clear and credible plans for eliminating emissions from their own operations.
With data, with clear data.
With clear data as well. And indeed, you will have seen, I know there's a debate in the EU about reporting and corporate reporting and sustainable reporting. But in the UK, I think the legislation that has been drafted or proposed goes even further. it isn't just reporting on the here and now, but we must report on the transition so that we don't get that shock in 2030 that we haven't gone as far as we should do. So it is really, really in the kind of main business landscape now that data must be there. They must have clear emission plans. And we as a CBI, as a small business in our own right, we employ 250 people across the UK and about 15 outside the UK. We'll be putting together our own emissions plan on how we can cut down. And some of it is quite simple. For example, what I'm doing today, I am not in London, I am not travelling from Brussels, etc., and yet I am fully participating. And to quote a great, someone I have a lot of respect for at a B20, which is the business equivalent to the G20 summit in Rome earlier this year. As you know, the UK hosted the G7 and CBI, the B7. Christine Lagarde said, this recovery has to be digital, it has to be green, and it has to be inclusive. And I think that is very, very true. And it comes to my final point, and this is the inclusive point. You hear that, yes, going green is more expensive or you lose jobs. You will get citizens on board if you can see that there are more and new and exciting jobs and given them the skills to have those jobs for the future.
Right.
And that's how you get the mentality going at all levels, consumer, employee, employer, business. The first mover advantage of being out there and setting the example will pay dividends, and that's where I think businesses are very clear. Certainly in the UK, our ones want to be at that forefront.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. I'm begging time from coffee at the moment, so just give it. So I want you to feel that this is important. Jan-Olof, I saw you nodding agreement there about data, because.
On data, absolutely, and I think it's a good way of moving away from just discussing ambitions and goals, and actually proving that you can deliver the results. But if I may, Nick, just two brief comments on your previous questions asked. Someone asked about the consumption versus production emission measures. I think what we should strive for is to measure net emissions. So you look at both your consumption and your production, but then also exporting of positive results. And then there was another question on, can we achieve the goals without China and Russia on board? Of course we can't. That's obvious, and never mind US for that matter. But I think the role we can, as everyone now is signing up to long-term net zero goals, I think our role must be to accelerate the pace. And I think it's also urgent for us, because that's the way we can create a competitive advantage. I'm sure this is irreversible as a momentum, and that's why it's critical for ourselves that we can take advantage of where we are and be a part of accelerating the pace, and then we can deliver, I'm sure, both climate advantage, but actually also great commercial opportunities.
Let me press that other point again with Anna and Peter, just about data, because I'm running out of time, and I want to put it to both of you. You running a city, you running an enormous company with enormous foundation, still expanding, still very successful. The big issue of you've got to have data now in order to convince virtually anyone.
Yes.
Let me quote one of my favorites, Michael Bloomberg. He said, "In God we trust, all other bring data." It's so you have, as a politician or a business leader, you have to ask for that. And now Harvard is working on it, a lot of universities that will have scalable data where you can actually track. And then it's important about waste. It's the whole life cycle. It's about how we produce, where the energy comes, but also, of course, about the waste. You have to have that whole holistic perspective. Otherwise, we will not succeed. So that was a very important remark, I think.
All right. Jan, you've got the microphone. As your chairman of the chamber, I can beg you to support me to just extend this into coffee.
Yes, I always support you, Nick. You're a great man. And also support the panel. Some very interesting comments, so thank you for that. And we all agree with the comments. I don't think anybody would disagree. But I also, besides working here for the chamber, I also work in finance at Deutsche Bank. And when we talk specifics, so when we talk general, we all agree here about the comments and so on, and it's very positive. and COP26 and the importance. But when we take companies on roadshow, when we ask investors to invest, it's always easier to take the traditional energy companies on a roadshow, and you've also observed the evaluations of the traditional companies. They've gone up quite a lot over the past year, some of the majors and so on in the energy sector. So I still find it difficult to find investors, private investors, when you go on roadshows with specific companies or projects. It's quite challenging to find investors. I know that there's a lot of effort in the sustainability area. We all believe in it. We all put up projections and so on. But still, when you talk specifics, it's quite difficult at times to find the private capital. That's just an observation.
Yet Mark Carney and others say there's no shortage of money.
Exactly. But it's just an observation. It's sometimes difficult when you are in front of investors, and government support is always important when these.
Shall we try an impromptu session now between now and the end of coffee and cancel coffee?
I don't know. No, I don't know if we want to do that because it's not that important. But
all right.
Well,
observation. Can I thank you enormously? I know you're meeting the mayor a little later, so it's good that you got your PCR test done. And we were delighted to have the deputy mayor here talking about the real challenges for the City of London. Can I thank all four of you? But can I just also add one other thing which we haven't, and I apologize, had time for, which is nature is now playing an enormous role after the Dasgupta report of February this year. And that's what came through loud and clear in Glasgow. Nature and the externalities there is critical. In other words, you can't assume that you can just abuse nature now as part of business. That's got to have a cost. It's got to have data. And so many of the assumptions of many businesses, that they can somehow, if you like, rape the landscape, those days are over. And it's been amazing the speed at which that has happened. So thank you all very much indeed. And I do invite you to coffee, juice, water, or whatever you need to keep you sustained for the last sessions of the summit. And if you can be back in here within 15 minutes, it would be great. Then we can finish on time. Thank you.